Greetings and welcome back to the ReefSmart podcast brought to you by Dell Discount Reef. Today, we are talking about a very important issue, which is one of the number one questions for people new to the hobby and sometimes people that have been in the hobby for a while that just kind of didn't care anymore. So the question is, and this comes from Dave, when should I do a water change? His tank was set up 2 months, he moved it, and during that 2 month period, and then we dropped 12, 15 fish and inverts in there, not including snails and crabs. And he's like, when do I need to do a water change? Great question. So the answer to that question is twofold. Number one, have you set an interval for when you're expecting to do a water change? What is that amount? And part of that is if it's going to be more frequent, it can be smaller. If it's going to be less frequent, it needs to be bigger. So the answer to that question realistically is when can you do it? And that's not like right now when life is easy or whatever, when things get busy, when, I'm planning on a week, it's going to be two. Great. I do that here. It happens. So the other part about it is if you're not going to do a water change, what should you do? Because there's a weird misconception that if you don't do a water change, it's okay. You're just skipping a water change. And that can be the case, but in a stocked reef tank, which is the target audience we're going for, the answer is you can't, because your alkalinity uptake and things like that, if you're depending upon a water change to maintain everything and you skip one, it's not too, and you're like, oh, I skipped one, it's not a big deal. Great. Well, your alk went from 9.2 to 8.1, and then over the next week and a half, it's going to drop to 7.7 or 7.5, and then you really run into a real issue. Right, and you're like, oh, shoot, things are stressed. Now I got to do something. So then what do you do? If you're not going to do that water change, do one test. Do an alkalinity test. Find out where things are at. And if everything's the same as the last time you did it, and again, just do it when you're doing a water change. It's the baseline for your tank, right? Because the number one priority for a reef tank is water quality, water flow, lighting. 1, 2, 3. Simple. So, the answer to that question is as frequent as you can, but just be consistent no matter what it is. And I'll give you an example. I've taken care of, so many tanks for myself, for people over the past years. Like, not like 1, 10, 20, but like 100 plus, right? So some tanks, currently, I do a monthly water change on. Some tanks I do it weekly, and I hit it every 10 days, right? Another tank I do when, like with the grow out system, I do it, but when I do like a 30 or 40% water change. So it's about 200 gallons at a time, because we just reduced the size of the system to make some changes. Anyway, getting back to the crux of the point, because I can run a long time on this one, is you set a realistic schedule for when you would like to do a water change. Like if you have to go get water from a store, you got to account for that. So if it's 4 times a month, plan that you're going to hit it 3 times a month. And for the first couple months you may, and then you're going to get tired one day, you don't want to do it. That's fine. But also, you need to have a backup plan in the event that you don't do a water change, and then you spend 60 seconds doing your alkalinity test, and you're like, oh, poop. It has changed. Things are doing well. You're going to want to dose with something like the biocalcium, or, again, that's my favorite go-to. You can do Calculosser. We'll get into all that here very, very soon. But the whole idea is that, your water change is maintaining the balance in your tank. So if you're not going to do a physical water change, supplement with something that's going to replace the nutrients that have been taken up. So in short, that's the answer. And a lot of people say, well, oh crap, I can just replace these supplements and I don't have to do a water change. For people that have been in the hobby a long time, you can definitely do that. But a fresh water change goes a long way, especially when your tank is new, because there's a lot of processes that are up and going, things are unstabilized. But either way, replacing everything in the right ratios, including, your organic nutrient levels and things like that, a water change is going to be particularly important in the first year. How effective that's going to be is going to be a balance of like the salt that you're using along with the salinity that you're mixing it to and your frequency. We'll get into that more, but to wrap this up today, because again, trying to keep it in the 5 to 7 minute mark, set a schedule, do your water change. And by the way, if you're buying salt from a local fish store, which I'm not against that, know the salinity they're mixing it to Make sure it's mixed to the same salinity. And if you are, and again, controversial point, but for example, if you're running a reef tank and they mix it to 1.024, buy a small pump, get a little extra salt, mix that sucker up to 1.026 or 0.27. That's where the ocean's at. You'll get a little bit of higher alkalinity. You'll get a little higher trace element levels. It works great, and your growth rate and the corals are just happier at that 1.026 level. If you're running fish only, shoot, and drop 1.022, 1.021, perfect. Okay, but we're talking reef tank here, especially mixed reef. It's not going to make a difference to the fish. They were all came from the ocean, so the more like the ocean it is, the better you're going to be. And for those of you that don't know this, the reason that like a lot of stores run lower salinity is because parasites don't do as well in lower salinity water. That's why you get it. But fish come from the ocean the same as the coral. I'm going to leave it there. So I hope that helps you out today with your water change questions. We're going to have a lot more coming up on this with water change and dosing and salt. But for today, that's it. Stay tuned tomorrow. Hit that like and subscribe button. Sayonara.